your book your new book is saying, or your latest book, I should say, is saying that the world needs more children, and it seems as though this year quite a few people are coming round to this argument. But the big question is, how do we go about achieving this? And obviously there are natalist policies that various countries have tried. Could you give us a sort of a quick rundown of which ones have been successful and which ones haven't?
Well, just to be clear, my book's actually out in July, on the 4th of July, as it happens, which I hope will give Lionel a double reason for celebration. And the penultimate chapter is what government can do for us, and the last chapter is what can we do for ourselves. So on the government chapter, I look at the various policies that have been tried over time. Classically, Hungary at the moment, for example, offers home loans, which get written off if you have 3 children or more, subsidised childcare. All these sorts of things seem to have only a marginal benefit, and Hungary's got its fertility rate up, but not significantly more than those of surrounding countries, and it's still way, way too low. So I think government throwing money at the problem is of limited benefit, unless what they're throwing money at is a society with a very high requirement desire to have children. Now, if you ask women how many children they have in the UK and the US, they say 2 to 3. But they're not having them. Now, we know that, therefore, they'll say, well, it's about housing, it's about childcare costs, and these are important things. But then if you look where childcare is very subsidised, as in Germany, or where housing is cheap in parts of the UK, you'll find that the fertility rate is still low. So I don't want to say governments don't bother about those things, but I think those things alone will not fix the problem. The first thing to fix the problem, I think, is having a society in which people genuinely want children very much and put it as a very high priority. And then I think government can work with that, nudge the culture in that direction. But I think there's a limit to what it can do just by subsidising and making housing cheaper and encouraging people to, women to go into the workforce and subsidising childcare. Positive though all those things are, I think we actually need a change of heart as a society, and we need to understand that if we want a future as a nation, as a culture, then we have to reproduce ourselves to provide the people who will continue to bear that culture. Now, some people may not want that. Some people may not care. And it may well be that when a society or a culture ceases to wish or care about replacing itself, it will cease to exist.
I don't think you can get away from the fact, and I totally agree with Paul, that a lot of what drives fertility is values. And, you know, many people look at Africa and think, oh, the only reason they're having large families is that they don't have access to contraception. And that's not really true. And that's been borne out by polls asking Africans how many children they want. And in many instances, they're not actually having as many as they would like. You know, they don't want to average 5.5 children. They want 6 children. And that's because, by and large, the cultures in that continent place a huge value on family and on having children, and having a large family is high status. Whereas if you have a large family in the West right now, you're kind of weird. And people are going to look at you like, what's your problem? And I mean, there was one of these valedictory college speeches recently. I don't remember who it was. Some sports person in the U.S. this month who gave a speech saying, you know, it was old-fashioned,
yeah,
but saying, you know, women who are graduating today, many of you are going to go on to have careers, but let's, you know, I'm sure many others of you are looking forward to marrying and having children, and that's where you'll find your calling. And there was absolute outrage across the country. Now, I have a career, and I didn't have any kids, so I'm definitely part of the problem. But it is interesting that you get that bad a backlash politically and culturally when you have someone promoting the idea that you might center the value of your life in your family. Whereas in Africa, that's totally normal. And how you subtly change the value system of an entire culture, and I'm talking about ours, I don't know. It's difficult. And it's not something that government can necessarily impose.
Paul, do you agree with that? And if I can push it a bit further, do you think feminism is compatible with a society that reproduces itself at sufficient levels?
Well, let me start about agreeing with Lionel. I want to make a point on race, actually, because if we'd been having this conversation 30 or 40 years ago, people would say, oh, that's just white people worrying about not enough white people. This is not a white issue. If you go to large parts of South America, if you go to Jamaica, for example, never mind China, Korea, this is becoming a human issue. All these places have way below replacement level fertility rates, even, as I said, some quite poor places like Jamaica, like Thailand. So let's get away from the taboo about it really being about race. We know the Japanese are worrying about it in terms of civilizational collapse, as their prime minister said. We know the Tunisians are worrying about it, and the president of Tunisia has talked about the country being overwhelmed. So this is not any longer a white issue. So I think that should allow us to talk about it more freely, given the taboos that exist in the world today. Now, in terms of feminism, I don't want to roll the world back to 1950 or Britain back to 1950. I am the husband of a very successful, hard-working woman. I have 2 daughters and a son, and both my daughters are pursuing their careers, as well as having had their first children before the age of 30. We're not going back to 1957. So the question then is, and this is one of the chapters in my book, how do we reconcile the kind of feminism that says women need to participate in the workforce, we need them at every level in society, and they need to get educations just as much as men, and then to use those educations in ways as men do to earn their livings, to express themselves, to pursue careers. These are givens. And where in more patriarchal societies like Greece or Japan, where women are not given the opportunity to combine career and family, where you could say feminism has not advanced much, the fertility rate is not very high. It's been traditionally higher in more progressive societies like Sweden or ours or France's. So what we have to do is not go back to 1957, but go forward, as it were, to 2027 and say, how can we imagine a feminism, by which I mean a world in which women are given all the opportunities that men have, and we need them as much as we need men. And at the same time, we work policy and society around the fact that women are going to have children and that they and their partners are going to need to look after their children. We need to go forward rather than backwards in terms of feminism and create a society which is compliant with feminism and gives women opportunities, but at the same time is able to combine that with a fertility rate of 2 to 3 children per woman. I don't think that should be impossible.
As I understand it, the real problem in the West is not so much that women just don't want children anymore. It's that they're putting childbearing off. The chances of your having any children are only about 50% once you've crossed the age of 30. And if you poll women, they're not having as many children as they actually want. And maybe most of all, we need to get across the message that if you do want to have a family, don't put it off. And, you know, that means slightly reorganizing how women pursue their careers. There's no real getting away from the fact that having children, it interferes with your career. I mean, it takes time. You're going to take time off. Your employer's not going to like it. But this whole pattern we've developed in the West, whereby, you have to get your career on track. You have to establish yourself, and then you'll have children. That's not working.
Mm.